If anything, I see right now, this is the time where we need to open an overdose prevention site. I'd like to get into a room and maybe publicly, talk about like, why is this different? Why are the lives of what he considers the people of value different than drug users' lives? That's the real question. Why not do the same for drug users so they can safely use?
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Right now, we are all supposed to be staying at home. But what if you have no home to go to? For hundreds of thousands of Americans, that is the case. They can't shelter in place because they have no shelter. The COVID-19 crisis has exposed many weak spots in our culture and the need for radical change. It has revealed which workers are really essential. Hint, it's not the executives keeping this late-stage capitalist economy afloat, and that we need to pay these workers a living wage. It has revealed that yes, healthcare is a human right, and that contributing to public health is, shockingly, essential to keeping everyone healthy. And perhaps most relevant to this show, the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated the utmost importance of supervised consumption sites, or places where people can use drugs under medical supervision. We have numerous episodes on this topic in the past, so if you want to check out our archives, there's episode 31, episode 26, or way back on episode number 4 for more information. I'm Troy Farah, and you're listening to Narcotica. Our episode today focuses mainly on Pennsylvania, which in many ways has been ground zero for the opioid crisis and the debate over opening a supervised consumption site. With me, I have co-host Zachary Siegel from Chicago and Christopher Maraff in Philly. Say hi, guys.
What's up?
Hey, you.
And we have two guests today on the show. Sterling Johnson, a housing lawyer who is well known among Philly harm reductionists. He's worked with the Soul Collective, whose primary goal was to open a supervised consumption facility, even before Larry Krasner said he would not prosecute. And this is in the wake of the closure of El Campamento, a long-used injection spot hidden behind privately owned rail tracks that the Inquirer called a, quote, heroin hellscape. The closure was an absolute clusterfuck that landed hundreds of people living in tents under 4 of Kensington's most highly trafficked thoroughfares. Sterling was a fixture at Soul events and went on to serve on the advisory board of Safe House. We also have Matthew Sheppeck, an organizer with the Philadelphia Tenants Union, a harm reductionist and addiction outreach specialist that works with homeless drug users in the Kensington area of Philadelphia. I want to ask you both what differences you are seeing since this coronavirus crisis happened. And let's start with you, Sterling, what you're seeing. You mentioned that not long ago, after the stay-at-home order was issued, that several homeless encampments were cleared and broken up.
Yeah, Troy, the amount of really locally, like Center City and also in Kensington, those places that people usually drop into, people can no longer go to. So where do people go? Where are they supposed to move on to? Places where people went to the bathroom to use the water, inject inside, maybe in a bathroom, behind a building. The issues are dire. The amount of food that people used to get from a lot of the restaurants really has dried up. So I think we're talking like resource at the most basic level, like water and food, places where people are feeling really, really, really tight.
Matt, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So, the difference I've seen personally on the streets is, so what we've seen so far in the data is that there's been fewer people turning into the CRCs for addiction and fewer overdoses showing up in the ED. But simultaneously speaking to people in the streets, I'm hearing that, they're seeing an uptick in overdoses. So we're not really sure if overdoses are currently going up or down, because the data is really limited in the way that it's collected. My hope is that, people just aren't dying in places that we can't see or find them right now. On top of that, to echo what Sterling said, yeah, there's definitely a scarcity of resources. A lot of the groups that typically help out in the neighborhood, providing food, water, and other essentials to homeless individuals in the area have kind of stepped back. Right now, the only organizations I know of that are still regularly providing food and other services is Prevention Point, but they're relatively overwhelmed. There's still a lot of people out there on the streets with nowhere to go. You go anywhere else in the city, it's a ghost town. But if you go up to Kensington, there's still people all over the streets, not social distancing, and these people are vulnerable, especially because of the immunocompromised status that drug use can lead to, and other contributing factors, being on the streets, being exposed to the elements day in, day out. So we've definitely seen a very little aid to replace what was there before.
I just quickly jump in, and I get daily reports that, I don't know, you may get them too, Matt, from police, fire, EMTs, and Prevention Point, which is not every overdose, obviously, but overdoses are, like, at least according to that data, that's about the only good thing about this whole thing. And they'll have days without a single fatal. When we were having 3 to 4 a day in 2017. And as I wrote recently in Filter, I think there's a perception that the supply lines are going to get cut, and people are, I think on the supply side in Philadelphia, maybe holding on to stuff. It's not really the case, according to the sources I spoke to down there, that said it's still flowing, because it's coming through in the commercial shipments, which haven't been, they didn't shut that yet. So I don't know. In those 3 main variables, like police, fire, EMT, and Prevention Point, there are days we don't have a single fatal overdose.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just seems like we're in a huge atmosphere of uncertainty. Like, we probably won't know for a while whether, overdoses are going up or going down in this, how long has it been? 6 weeks or so. And then, like, I don't know. It's so hard to get a solid grasp on everything with the limited data collection that we have. And so I'm just like sort of like holding on to like images and shit that I see. And to me, like, one of like the grimmest / most absurd things I saw on homelessness was out of Las Vegas, where they set up like a grid for people to sleep in, like a square in a parking lot, and it was like all 6 feet apart, and there's just like I don't know how big the grid was and how many people were in there, but there's like 100,000 plus hotel rooms in Las Vegas that are just straight up empty, and yet people are like still sleeping outside. Just like the whole, I don't know, like the whole pandemic is really showing, like, who matters. And it's like corporations, it's their bottom line. It's definitely not people. Like, this is more of the same, but it's just like so in our face now that we can't, I mean, we've all been paying attention to this stuff for years, but it's like, I don't know if anything will change after this. Like, the images are just so galling, but yeah, grim stuff all around.
I did just want to follow up really quickly. I mean, I understand that some of the data that's being transferred does show that there has not been as many overdoses, but it does worry me when I do hear high-level health officials pretend as if we don't have some sort of addiction or overdose crisis still. I was in a meeting where I heard a high-level official just make that statement, and I don't think that that's the case. I think that people still need support.
And plus, that's not the only thing affecting. I mean, you're going to see a jump in sleep cut because people are just going to be falling asleep and falling in the train tracks, and so there's other harms that.
Yeah, and just to echo what was said about hotel rooms before, Philadelphia did actually rent out rooms at the Holiday Inn, which I believe were initially supposed to house the homeless. But the only people I know that are being housed right now are people with COVID who came from inpatient treatment centers. I know Kirkbride recently had an outbreak of COVID-19.
Oh, that's so funny. I was trying to get somebody in there today. I guess that's not a good thing.
Yeah, don't send people to Kirkbride right now.
Okay.
So a treatment facility that had an outbreak of COVID, and to get people out and get them housed, they got them into a hotel. Is that the situation?
Yes, that is the situation.
I think all of this kind of speaks to the importance of supervised consumption because, people are being told to shelter in place, but a lot of people live alone. So there's going to be people using alone more, and people who don't have a place to shelter, like, we should be able to bring them in off the streets and like allow them to use safely under medical supervision. This is such an argument we repeat over and over on this program. But can we talk about how a couple months ago there was like some back and forth? Will they or won't they open one of these facilities? But how has COVID-19 like delayed that opening even more?
Yeah, so I mean, leading up to this in mid-February, there was an announcement from the judge that was an official end to the case, um, that would allow, for us to say that we are not breaking the law if we open a safe state consumption site in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And there was real backlash from the community around that after there was an announcement to open in South Philadelphia. There's a two-pronged part of that. There was the kind of political mobilization of a lot of right-wing people, yeah, and then there was the political component where a bill was open to block the opening as well. So an attempt to change the zoning components as well as this kind of rabble-rousing there. And right now we're in talks to think about what that bill looks like. There are a lot of people in the city that want there to be community engagement, but understand the need for the sacred center site to be open somewhere. So that means that there may not be consensus about everybody about the need for it, but there has to be some sort of community engagement that addresses some of those concerns, but it has to open somewhere. And the only place that could open as of April 2020 is in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So Philadelphia and Safe House and the people here have been committed to making that happen. I mean, we formed a new network called the Philadelphia Overdose Prevention Network to get all of the harm reduction organizations in Philadelphia on the same page. So, and we have a job announcement out to hire a community organizer to think really deeply about talking to people and trying to meet them where they're at, and to put a lot of those harm reduction practices into community engagement. So we're going to try this again. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's still an overdose crisis. There has not been turned around. We are one of hundreds of overdose prevention sites that need to be opened around the country. So we need to do it right. We need to do it in a very intentional way. And I mean, that's what we're committed to.
So is there going to be sort of like a canvassing or like door knocking campaign to like knock on neighbors' doors and be like, hey, like, what would you think if this opened, a couple blocks from you? Like, is that sort of the strategy going forward?
My takeaway from this is that community buy-in is bullshit. Like, I don't get to decide whether Arby's opens on Snyder Avenue. You know what I mean? Like, now that it's a political issue, that they've lost the upper hand. I don't see that working. But obviously, I'm interested to hear your position on that.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that there are stakeholders in every community that have the ability to mobilize people. So at least talking to those individuals and addressing their concerns in a meaningful way is. It just happens to be that this is a controversial idea, and though I don't find it controversial, I think that we're going to have to meet the community where it's at in terms of having a lot of humility about it, while simultaneously going forward, even if there isn't universal consensus about the benefits of it. I am not a part of Safe House. I'm a person that's a part of a network. I'm a person with one opinion, but it's just. I think this COVID crisis has really, really put that into focus about the need to protect livelihoods at any cost. There weren't any discussions about where to put any COVID crisis testing sites around the city. There wasn't a need to change any zoning, and I think that talking to politicians, I mean, making those comparisons would be a really important thing. And I mean, it was brought up by one smart reporter to say to one of the council people, well, it seems very, very sensible that you would open this hotel for people that are experiencing the COVID crisis to allow them to self-isolate. Why not do the same for drug users so they can safely use? And he said that this is different. I'd like to get into a room and maybe publicly, talk about like, why is this different? Why are the lives of what he considers the people of value different than drug users' lives? That's the real question. I mean, if anything, I see right now this is the time where we need to open an overdose prevention sites, or harm reduction spaces, or syringe exchanges. Other interventions have always been open during the crisis because it was a crisis. They didn't wait until after the crisis or at a convenient time to save lives. They acted swiftly, and because people's lives mattered. Right now, we know that drug users' lives don't matter to these people.
Isn't there also like some absurd development where so a syringe exchange like is technically illegal in the state of Pennsylvania, but syringe service workers were like deemed essential workers and were like allowed to stay open? Didn't that happen like weeks ago?
It's illegal anywhere outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean there aren't groups doing it and being sort of turned a blind eye to.
No, right, but like the state or the law is that like this stuff is illegal, like giving people syringes is illegal in certain respects or certain areas, whatever, but at the same time, like they were also deemed essential. Like that dichotomy is like, like clearly doesn't square up. Like you have to pick a side.
Yeah, I think, that's right, and it gets to the point of, it's like, what is the law? What does the law mean? What is the purpose of the law? A lot of those assumptions have been challenged here during the COVID crisis. When it comes to needed services, certain service programs clearly are essential services that are very important to the communities, even the communities where they are not illegal and that they work underground. They happen to be very important parts of those communities. I think that the fact that we see it, at least in Philadelphia, where the idea of arresting somebody and putting them into a box, incarcerating them immediately, seems to be questioned as a whether that's a threat to public health. And when it comes to here, we've seen that people are allowed to cite and then, I guess, arrest and cite and then allow people to leave, and that doesn't seem to be threatening public safety. I think that there's a group of people that are attempting to show that it affects public safety, but it hasn't. So it's like, well, why should people ever be in a prison for drug possession or for engaging in sex work? Those questions are being challenged right now.
And I would add that in my experience, opioid users, opioid dependent people are not committing violent crimes. They're boosting, they're opening car doors, and they're doing like the kinds of things that would qualify. That's why there hasn't been an uptick in crime, because they've already been doing that kind of stuff, and it's not going to register on a violent crime. We're still keeping violent criminals, but unfortunately, the people that got arrested just prior to this are having a hard time getting out. Did you hear anything about a couple hundred let go, or was that just sort of a street anecdote I heard from Philadelphia County jails?
So I have heard that they are increasing the amount of people that they are releasing. It is not happening fast enough. I think Philadelphia is one of the cities that has lagged behind others. So yes, we have been released some people, but not nearly enough.
Sterling, when we met at Reform in St. Louis last year, you expressed some criticisms of the supervised consumption and the harm reduction movement as be kind of lacking representation. Like a lot of people in this space are, people that don't have a lot of experience with drug use or sex work or no experience at all. And yet they're on these boards, they're making these changes, they're the ones that are representing everything. Can you talk about why that's kind of ineffective?
It comes down to a mix of a few things. There are no fast and hard rules about like representation, and we see a lot of tokenism going on, but it is really important to have people that have experienced some of these things so they understand the urgency. An issue like homelessness is a really good example of that, where people understand that have been homeless, understand the fear and the intricacies of being homeless, of getting your stuff stolen on a regular basis, of feeling like you need to be awake all the time. So that might lead you to more stimulant use. The idea of you being cold, this is the cold that like never goes away because you've been out there. Those are just things that, I don't know, if you never experienced it, you're not going to think about that. You're going to say, oh, a person can experience that. That's fine. You don't think of it as a horror that like you never want to get near again. And I think that we're seeing a lot of things that are like structural, that are based in our kind of racist, ableist society too, where people think that if you don't meet a certain standard, that you don't deserve human dignity. I think that's just one of the really, I don't know, can I say fucked up things about of our society. But that it really goes down to having a real group of people that you can go to talk about the intricacies of the issue that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, I've written this and we've all said some version of this, that there are huge blind spots in the policymaking process if the right people are not at the table, and if the right people aren't in the room to ask the right questions. Then that's how we get bad laws. That's how we get stuff that, is labeled, oh, that's an unintended consequence of this, but it's like it's the most obvious consequence to someone if they would have seen it. And I think there's just sort of like a nonchalance or sort of like distant attitude that I think is part of the policymaking process, and also part of government officials. Like they take on that attitude. And like I just heard it, I think today in like a press conference, like one of Andrew Cuomo's officials said that, oh, only 263 people inside Rikers, died from COVID-19 so far. And like we dodged this huge outbreak that we thought was going to happen. Like the number should have been much higher. And it's just like hand waving away 263 people who died as, oh, well, they're just prisoners, like no big deal. It could have been much worse. And like that kind of stuff just like makes my stomach hurt, but it comes out of their mouths like with such nonchalance and such ease. And this gets to like, the whole heart of what we've been talking about is who matters right now. And again, it's like not the people who were suffering and marginalized before this.
And if you're in state prison right now, you're on full-time lockdown pretty much. I met a guy that came out of Phoenixville the other day. He said they get out of their cell for a shower, they're put back in. The guards, and they had 3 cases, like 1 guard, 2 inmates, and the whole prison is on lockdown.
It's torture, like solitary. It's torture. It drives people fucking insane.
I mean, if I could just give a couple of on the ground like observations that are contributing to this. One is that the drug user population is actually becoming the victims of crime more than perpetrators. In the past week, I know 2 people that are good sources of mine that have been robbed. One guy was beaten up, had his ribs broken over nothing, really, literally nothing, just stress, the common stress we all feel, but the stress that's amplified by not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. SEPTA is bleeding money. That's our transport agency. So they're letting, people are leaving there. They're trying to, they shut down 2 stations, 2 of which are adjacent to K&A, Kensington and Allegheny, which has pushed more people into that area. So there's a lot of like policy things that have policy initiatives that have been enacted that are making this population very desperate. People are running out of money quick. If you want a really, really cheap pair of Air Jordans, brand new, go to Kensington right now. It's like that kind of situation.
Yeah, so shutting down Somerset Station was straight up discriminatory, in my opinion.
What is Somerset Station, just for people not in Philly?
So Somerset Station is where a lot of users congregate. A lot of people that smoke K2 congregate in that area. Some dealers for pills congregate in that right in that intersection right there. There's a couple of delis. It's essentially like one of the hubs outside of Kensington and Allegheny. I would actually say that there's more people there typically now than Kensington and Allegheny. It's just sort of a place where people hang out. So the choice to cut that off from the stations that were cut, I think, it's pretty clear why the city made that judgment to me. They don't want people traveling in and out of Kensington. and it's clearly pretty discriminatory in my opinion. As far as like violence and victimization goes, my clients are robbed weekly. I mean, just yesterday I encountered 2 clients who were victims of violent crime. Our program is currently giving away phones to people so that we can stay in contact with them and stay in contact about their medication so that we can call in their medication for them. And so far, we've already had a handful of those phones stolen from some of our homeless and some of our housing insecure individuals. So it's ridiculous.
Yeah, which gets back to sort of the politics of who matters, and it's like the police are not serving and protecting these kinds of crimes, right? Like someone who doesn't have a home, who's losing property, like that's not considered a property crime. Like these people don't hold property.
Yeah, exactly. And when my clients go to fill police reports or flag down a police officer, the police will typically flat out refuse to fill out a police report, and they tell them that they have to go to the police station to file a police report, which is not what they would do in any other part of town. And the police station is several miles away, and they expect these people to get there on foot.
Yeah, but if like a 6th grader in the suburbs gets their iPod mini stolen, yeah, like the school shuts down.
Oh yeah, it'd be a federal case.
I mean, my car was stolen in the 24th, and I'm supposed to call 911 down here in South Philly. So the 24th district is way far away from here.
Wait, your car was straight up stolen? What the fuck? When did that happen?
Dude, it took me my girlfriend like 3 or 4 days to track it down, and I think it was a towing. Like we have a lot of really, really shady towing companies in Philadelphia, and I think they saw it sitting in this lot for a couple of days because I had a flat, and they just gripped it up because that's where the police department says it is, and then but the company said they didn't have it, and it's just been. But I can attest to that, and also police don't want to get near, like they don't want to touch anybody. You know what I mean?
Speaking of that, there's like I think like Lawrence County, Indiana, something like that. A sheriff like came out and straight up said that during the pandemic that their police officers will not be carrying naloxone and will not be reversing overdoses. And it's just like gets to this whole kind of mind-numbing spot where for years the police have sort of paraded their overdose reversal naloxone tool belt as like we can't arrest our way out of this and we're helping the community, when like probably a large portion of police to begin with never wanted to take that on and never wanted to be the first responders to overdoses. And like now some are just coming out and straight up saying like, yeah, we're not doing it. And it's like, good, like you don't have to do that. Get the naloxone to people who actually know what the fuck they're doing. And like you don't need to arrive on the scene of an overdose. Like there's no reason for it. Like it's not a homicide investigation. Like if there's naloxone and some health personnel there, that's it. And this gets back to safe consumption sites. If we have those, then yeah, cops don't need to show up at overdose scenes and start going through people's phones and then start creating a drug-induced homicide case.
To me, it's really interesting, like what the purpose of them too is. I know I want to go back to the idea that at least in Philadelphia, we had a stay-at-home order that started on the 23rd of March, 2020, and that was the same date in which our city government got together and decided to clear out an encampment that was under the convention center. These 2 spaces that are fairly well lit and safe for people to stay at night. And they usually clear out in the morning, but our city government decided to go forward during the global pandemic and force the people to move. And many people did, and they went, but and there was one person that didn't, and their response to that was to involuntarily commit him. There was a slight altercation. 5 police uniformed men were on this one gentleman, and they put him in the back of a wagon and they took him away, and they involuntarily committed that person, which sometimes is worse than arresting a person. And then after that, what we've seen is a police vehicle is just hitched out at the end of the convention center. I don't need to say the particular streets, but they're just posted there for 24 hours a day. So when it comes to the purpose of the police, I mean, we know that they're there to protect private property. I don't, they don't protect us. They when people say that or call the police and you expect them to protect you, it's laughable to think that, unless you're talking about money, that they serve. That has to be talked about over and over again.
Yeah, I discovered an encampment that just had 3 tents, like way off the grid down here yesterday, and people are moving out of where they're going to be found, pretty much, and that's problematic for.
Yeah, and I know about, or I'm on a thread where we're talking about some encampments, but I don't even want to go to them because the police, at least in what I've seen, is that they know a lot. I mean, of course, we live in a surveillance state, so they kind of know everyone, like where everyone is, and they have quote unquote relationships with the people. But it's like as soon as you go someplace, the police are going to find it, and then they're going to break it up, and then it forces the people to move to another place.
I want to get back to naloxone. How is naloxone access being impacted by this crisis right now, and how is that contributing to overdoses?
To my knowledge, Prevention Point is still giving out just as much naloxone as it was before, but other programs that may distribute naloxone in the area have not been doing so.
I mean, I'm no longer with Soul Collective, but they have not stopped their outreach. Angels in Motion has a mobile syringe exchange that's goes throughout the city, and they have continued to do their work. I mean, in terms of naloxone outreach, for me and a few of my compadres, a nascent organization, yeah, we're continuing to go to places that others won't go to as well. So there's a large network of people that know that the overdose crisis has not stopped, and we're going to continue to be giving as much naloxone as possible. And I did just want to speak like a little bit towards that idea that some of the solutions are different than for people. I really support safe consumption spaces, supervised consumption spaces, but I do know that I know just as a drug user myself, like thinking about like what I would want is I would want a house. I would want a house where I could involve my friends and we would be able to use together. I wouldn't want to have to go to a place where I would be observed and surveilled. I'm like a fairly paranoid person, and if I'm using, I'm extremely paranoid. So I don't know. That just is not my ideal situation.
I would second that. I've spoken to numerous drug users that do not buy into the outreach needs to be an education about what these places look like.
Yeah. Slight note on that is that building is as a lot of drug users already use it. I think that was kind of a red herring, but still, yeah. I mean, I think that it would be interesting to figure out like what would the drug users of South Philly want. They might want their own personal space and come and go as they want, or they want it in Kensington, So
When thinking about this, I always go back to Travis Lupick's Fighting for Spacebook, because that was a situation in Vancouver where, it wasn't necessarily like top down where you had, a bunch of sort of policy people and non-users and lawyers and other people sort of bringing the idea to officials to make it. It was more ground up where you had, a very organized group of users who wanted this, and then they made it happen, and then they went out and convinced their fellow comrades that this is something that we need. And it took that kind of mobilization for the buy-in to happen, whereas in the US it might be sort of reversed, where you have the professional class of academics and other people who do think it's a good idea, and the mortality numbers sort of like merit a sort of intervention like this. But then there's a whole other component that I think, it's a big question how this will play out in Philly, whether or not, if you open the doors, will people use it? And I think that's where, Sterling, you were maybe talking about at the top of the show about not just getting the community buy-in and the NIMBYism tamped down, but also organizing on behalf of the people who would use it or wouldn't use it.
Yeah, and I do just want to kind of break down like even some of those fissures in the community too. I mean, I live down here in South Philly, a majority Black neighborhood, and I talk to people, and I don't know, it's like this is just not on the radar of a lot of people. I mean, it's really quite interesting to have some deep discussions. I think that it's a no brainer for a lot of people. They're like, yeah, and you're going to connect people to resources, yeah, to housing and healthcare, yeah, of course they want that. I mean, and these just happen to be people that just aren't the people that I think anybody cares about. Some people with some Section 8 and some live in public housing, but it's a no-brainer to them. I think it seems to be this middle class that has power over like their housing values. You know, I mean, those are the people that are stopping this.
Matt Sterling, I know you've had the experience that I have every day. In fact, there's somebody texting me repeatedly right now in desperate condition. There's a lot of our own money going out into helping people get well. It's it's tough for the people out there that are covering this community or working in this community. And I appreciate the work you guys do, and I know that we're all doing more than just saving lives. I mean, we're sort of getting people through, and I have a baby on the way. Like, I can't even afford to do this, so I don't carry money with me usually. But there's a couple people that have my number, and I've been, it's been hard to say no. You know,
I kind of just wanted to go back to, sort of, what Safe House would look like or should look like, or how it would meet the needs of a drug user. And I agree with Sterling. I don't necessarily love this sort of institutional format. I think maybe as a pilot program that, yeah, it's a good idea. But, thinking back to when I was, shooting heroin, I would have wanted something more like what they have in Kensington right now, which is the public bathrooms, where maybe there's some sort of attendant who's Narcan trained or, able to respond to things in a proper manner. But having those, throughout the entirety of the city, drug use isn't isolated to one or another part of the city. It's everywhere throughout the city. And for me, shooting heroin was just a casual part of my day. It's something that I needed to do to get to the next thing. So, that is sort of more like a more casual and more widespread implementation is something that I personally would like to see, because this single isolated institutional building, it sounds like a great idea, and the connectivity to services sounds like a great idea. I like that, but we need something that's more accessible, something that people are actually going to use.
Yeah, and thinking about that, just like if just the way that people use drugs, whether it's cocaine or heroin or MDMA, like they're not really using it in like a stall with a nurse watching them. Like that's pretty foreign concept to people, and drug use. Maybe that analogy doesn't really work out because there's just a pretty strict pragmatic approach to the opioid situation, which is monitor for the first 20 minutes or so to make sure there's no overdose, and then sort of like you're saying, Mac, like go about your day and go to the next thing. If going to a site, like going across town and then waiting in line and like doing this whole rigmarole, yeah, that might not really fold into someone's everyday life, and they may not use it that way. So like all these little nuances of daily life might not be at the forefront of the consumption or formation of something like a supervised consumption site in America. So yeah, I think thinking about all those things gets back to what we were saying before, why it's so important to have the right people at the table.
Yeah, I know. Chris made a great point about the money that people put out for others. Last year, the general assistance, like $200 a month, was cut in Pennsylvania, and I know I was as a person that I was on general assistance, and I was living with my aunt at one time, and it was this thing that like really sustained me, as well as food stamps. So I just remember that experience of it, and I just know that money it just is transferred to the people that are in the community. It's the people that are buying food for people that they know, or getting people transit to somebody, getting a lift when you need to get somewhere quickly to a doctor's appointment. It's all this stuff where there's costs that are here that still exist, even if the government doesn't do anything about it. It makes, and people are often, and I get accused of being angry about things, but when I know that there is money available that could be used for people, like being in a hotel, and I know that, like, I have friends of mine that are taking their own money, their own salaries, and paying for hotels for people, and the government's not doing anything about it because they don't think that they should. Like, that makes me really fucking angry. It makes me really fucking angry that the state, whose job is to do this thing, or maybe the Philadelphia housing authorities across the country, or the Office of Homeless Services, when it's in their mission to do it takes like a small woman who just like gives a shit about people to like house people that are immunocompromised, people with children. That cost still exists in this world, and there are going to be people that take it on because they care. I just want to put that out. Chris made just an excellent point about the amount of people that that we're connected to, and the amount of people that we're going to continue to help. Like, quote, I don't even know if it's helping. I really dislike that word, but like, we're gonna like use our resources. And when we're talking about resources, we're not talking about this austerity culture where we're trying to like save enough money. No, we're living beings, and we actually need food and water, and that costs money, and that means the money needs to be transferred to those people so they can actually live.
I mean, I know what's happening because these are people that are sick, and if somebody's sick, they've got me. I mean, and I gotta lay down boundaries that are like, okay, you gotta stop with the crack. You don't need the crack. Use the money to get your dope. You know what I mean? Like, so, well, I appreciate that, you brought up the services issue. This is like real life, and that's their number one priority when you wake up sick in the morning and it's 3:00 and you still haven't gotten well.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I have such a hard time with boundaries too. Well, no, you didn't say you did, but I have a hard time with boundaries.
Oh, I do.
I just want to put on a little bit of a plug for, if you're seeing people's Venmos and Cash Apps that need to be filled up, please share those too, because there's a nonprofit industrial complex that uses these stories and people's trauma as gold, right? As just like people use urine and blood as gold. I want to know who that person is, and I want to give to their Cash App directly. So you got to mix that up. Sure. I just want to put that in there. Thanks.
All right. So Sterling Johnson and Matt Sheppeck, thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, you can promote my Instagram. That's SHEPPECK SEES. It's Sheppeck Sees. And then follow the Philadelphia Tenants Union page on Facebook.
And Sterling, you can be found at LB_Sterling on Twitter.
Yes, pound Sterling.
Thanks for being on the program, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing. Thanks for giving us your time. And hopefully we have you back on and follow up about all of this soon.
Thanks for listening to Narcotica. You can follow us on Twitter at NarcoCast. We're also on other social medias like Facebook and YouTube. Today's episode is dedicated to Nancy Kieran at Clean Slate Centers in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. She's one of our biggest Patreon supporters, and we couldn't do this without people like her. Thank you, Nancy. Your contributions help keep this show free from corporate influence. Narcotica is an independent production by Christopher Morath, Zachary Siegel, and Troy Farah. Our theme music is by Glassboy. Additional music is by Soft and Furious. And I am your co-producer, Garrett. Give us a follow where you get your podcasts. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, you name it. And make sure you're staying safe. Take care, guys.